presenter, Nicola Nye, is going to be presenting on information architecture in a presentation titled Build It Better. Please make Nicola feel welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope there are a number of you in the audience who've gone old school and have brought a pen or two, because the latter half of this is actually a bit of a workshop. So I'm Chief of Staff at Fastmail, although I was originally hired there as a technical writer, and documentation is near and dear to my heart, as hopefully it is to all of you, otherwise you wouldn't be in this room. We all know that users and our internal teams have a better time of it when there's good documentation for them to follow. However, good documentation is not just about content, it is also about how that content is structured. So now I've got a question for you. How many people here have ever used a wiki? All hands in the audience, thank you very much, good. How many people here have used a wiki or own a wiki where the content has, let's politely call it a tire fire? Wikis are notoriously difficult, they go out of date very quickly, and so hold that in your brain while we go through this process today. Information architecture is about how you structure that totally great content that you have and make it worthwhile. My definition of what information architecture is might not be what you're thinking about. So I'm going to quickly go through what information architecture is, some tips on how you go about building an information architecture for your docs, and some ways that you can go about making sure that they're good, useful, some pro tips from what I've learned from attempting to apply it, and some things that you should not do for there be dragons. Then we're going to have a bit of a session where I'm going to show you a terrible website, and you guys get the job of trying to make it better. And then we'll get together at the end and share what we know. Now, just in case it's not clear, relying on search and FAQs is not a good information architecture. Please don't do that to yourselves or others. So what is it? Information architecture, it's a big word. It's got lots of kind of overlaid meaning from maybe building and stuff. It's all about helping your users figure out what they're looking at, what else might be useful for them, what they might need to go and do next, and even potentially, why are they even here? If you think, as someone has once told me, that information architecture is about how to trap your users on your site for the longest time possible so they buy your stuff, you should come to my talk on Thursday about practical ethics. So, what is an information architect? What does it look like? Who is an information architect? Have you ever met anyone with the title information architect? Wow, one person. Awesome. The secret answer to this special sauce is the answer is you. Everybody has input into information architecture, and so we all get to take on this role, but usually it falls into the hands of people who are in charge of documentation to turn all those ideas into a reality. So, using information architecture when you're building or rebuilding a site turns you into a superhero. How does information architecture help? It makes your users happier. And guess what? Happier users like to recommend you to your friends and their friends and their friends of friends, and they give you repeat business, and they give you very free advertising. That makes everybody happy. It means that your support team don't have to do all the hard work of looking after your users. It means that your internal team are agreeing on what vocabulary you're going to use. And as documentation writers, we are often quite low on the totem pole. We are the people brought in at the last minute to fix what they couldn't fix earlier on in design, what they didn't pick out potentially if they even did user testing. The documentation is the equivalent of, I'll fix it in post. It doesn't make sense, oh, we'll just write some docs to fill it up. But this then puts us in a very awkward position when someone with authority, power, or a higher pay grade comes along and says, no, that's not what I want it to look like. You should do it like this. We're left sitting there going, that's a terrible idea. That's how you think with your assumptions, but it's not how our users think. But how do I say no to this person? So the tools that we'll go through today will help you have some ammunition to fire back against that hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, to prove to them that what you're saying is not just your opinion versus their opinion. Yours is backed up by science. So after this workshop, this is what you are going to look like. I'm going to tie into some librarian information. I am a part-time librarian. You should be aware. I like shooting things with laser guns. You will have armour. You'll be able to defeat the dreaded FAQ. You will have boots of efficiency. I look forward to seeing you swoosh around the halls. All right, so how do you build information architecture? There's 5 general steps. You skip the first one if you don't already have some documentation that you're trying to fix, and that is take an inventory of your existing content. But let's go through all of this in more detail. How do you actually go about inventorying your existing content? And this is when the expertise of lovely librarians comes in. They've already very good at A, dealing with things that have got acronyms in them, and B, figuring out from a large pile of content what you need to get rid of, because they look after books, and books hang around for a really long time, and you can't just delete them with a single line of code. And it takes up physical space. So they've got 2 acronyms that they use, and I would say that they are also equally useful for when you're figuring out what have you got in your existing pile of content that needs to be re-examined or just plain removed. So you've got musty or you've got rot. So you want to have a look at what you've got now, what needs to go, what needs to be changed, what are you actually aiming for, and then you can do a bit of a gap analysis and figure out what do you have that's left to write. Step 2. What vocabulary are you going to use? Anybody who's ever had an argument with maybe the dev team or the marketing team on who's a user versus an account versus a customer will discover that terms get overloaded very quickly, and what maybe sales is talking about as being a customer is not what everybody else thought was a customer. So you want to have common terminology, and you want to start that terminology in terms that the user understands, not what the internal team understands, because otherwise your internal code will not match what's on the website and it won't match what's in your docs. What are your users expecting your site to be structured like? If you've got a shopping website, now is maybe not the time to go off the reservation and decide that tree structures are not your thing. Users have got this concept of cognitive load. If they are having to work harder to figure it out what it is that you're trying to tell them, they're going to turn away and go to your competitors. Once you've figured out what your overall sort of structure is going to look like, what your vocab is going to be, then you want to take the information segments that you have now or that you think you want to build and chunk them into digestible bits. This can often help you discover that once you've chunked your current content into bits, you've maybe got orphans or just giant gaps that are left over. So it can be very helpful to figure out what relates to what and what shouldn't be there at all and what's missing. I like to diagram the structure. Visual aid helps you and your customers figure out when they go down a link, are they expecting to maybe hit a leaf node, or are they expecting to end up in the centre of a flower which is going to explode with additional bits of information? You think about a shopping tree site versus Wikipedia, and you think about your mental map of how all the pages are laid out. They're very different. You want to think about how deep your intended structure is going to go versus how wide. Most people don't like clicking more than maybe 3 levels deep. If your structure's got something that all the content is buried 12 layers deep, probably a sign that your architecture needs to be reworked. And you can do this, with technical tools, or you can sit down with a piece of paper and a pen. So you've got your structure and you've examined it and you think you know where everything's going to go. You want to validate that thing. Much like Alec was linting his documentation earlier, we need to check that what we've got is also legit. But we've got all a bunch of biases, so you need to go out and find other people, and hopefully they're the kind of people that you're planning on accessing this content, so that they're coming in with their experience level and their context, and they can figure out what they're doing. And so we've got a bunch of tools that we can use. Card sorting is the most commonly used one, and we've got closed and open card sorting, and you'll get to have a chance at this in a minute. And tree twisting, and all of it is about sitting there and asking your users, if they had this website fully formed before them, could they find the information that they're looking for in an easy way? And you can use this to figure out, everybody fell over trying to find out where to put the frobnits. Well, maybe we need to reword that, get better vocabulary, put a different site structure on there. It's a way of validating that what you think you are going to build is the best of all possible things. But this is the best bit. You're not finished. Because out of that testing, you've got to go back and rework it all over again. All right, pro tips. When you have got a user tester and you're sitting there and you're showing them your site architecture and you're asking them questions or asking them to do tasks, don't influence them. It can be really helpful to read up on what it is to be a coach. So instead of saying to someone, that's really weird, nobody's ever put that card over there before, which will make them rethink their life choices, you want to say, interesting, tell me more about why you chose to put that there. You want to vary your demographics. Just as you've got different kinds of users of your product, you want to have different kinds of users into your user testing. You want to go about finding testers in different locations, and this can seem really daunting. I mean, you use marketing budget to find actual users who are going to pay, but how do you often don't have marketing budget to have people come and test your documentation? Companies get a bit freaked out about that. Find them in meetups, find them in co-working spaces, go out to where you would normally find your users and offer them something in order to come in and test. And given that hopefully you're accessing a pool of people who are interested in your product, you could even bribe them with free product. There are no wrong answers. The goal here, and you need to tell your testers this, the goal here is not that you are testing your testers to see whether they can run through the maze appropriately. The goal is to test whether your site architecture meets the user's needs. So in that case, it's totally appropriate to have them say, I don't know, you've asked me to do this task and I don't know how to achieve it. That is not their failure, that is our failure in our information architecture. Don't have more than one tester at a time, they'll influence one another. If you complete a round of testing and everybody's given you different answers, there's no common patterns, also a sign that maybe your site architecture needs to be reworked because nobody's got sort of common models in their head on what they're doing. Equally, don't keep doing it over and over until you finally get a glorious synergy and everybody is picking the same thing. People aren't like that. About 15 rounds is enough. Don't just ask your mum to come and fill it out, unless your target demographic is mothers of technical writers, which seems very narrow as a product selection, but I don't know. Don't ask Scotty from marketing unless you want someone from market, I'm not sure. Don't use your current team. We already know too much, unless they're brand new to the job, in which case, A+. Now, this is all about bandwidth. When you're watching someone go through and doing your user testing, the most useful thing you can do is do it in person. You get their body language, you get to see all the you get to see that they might sit there and go, I'm going to put the card over here and then I changed my mind. And as you shrink down, like you can get paid testers online who will do things for you over Skype. That's great, but you only kind of see half of their body. You can get people to fill out surveys. You can give them their information architecture and ask them to complete some tasks and all the rest of it, and then write them back to you with some answers. Then you're missing all the body language, you're missing all the verbal cues, you're missing whether they found it exciting and interesting or whether they were bored and did it over dinner and weren't really paying attention. So ideally you want to do this in person, but be aware there are other ways to do it, just it's less bandwidth, you're getting less results back. All right, superheroes, it's your turn. I'm going to give you a terrible website and then I'm going to divide you into 4 groups and you're going to do some card sorting and it's going to be awesome. So, before I reorganise the room, I'll just give you some context. I went to Twitter when preparing this talk and I asked Twitter, what is the most annoying website you've ever used? The delightful Kathy Reed, who's talking about her breast sense project later in the week, you should all go and see it, she said this was far and away the winner, and after having looked at it, I almost didn't use it because it was so bad. I couldn't come up with anything that was going to be sensible for this thing, but now I am. So is anybody like a lifelong lover of Element 14? Last time I did this, a whole bunch of people said yes. All right, so Element 14, it's a website that is all things to all people who are into electronics and microcomponents and things like Raspberry Pis and Arduinos. It's got a discussion board, it's got a shop, it's got tutorials, it's got webinars, it's got videos, it's everywhere. They've got about 3 different kinds of navigation depending on where you are, and it made me sad. So, we're not going to do the whole 5 steps because this is only a 40-minute tutorial, and even if I talk really fast, we're not going to have enough time anyway because there's more of you that turned up than I was expecting. So we're just going to focus on the hierarchy and the discoverability because, in my view, that was the #1 thing that would make this website much easier to use. The ability to find what you're looking for, and once you're there, figure out what else was useful. So we're going to do some card sorting, open and closed card sorting. If we get time, we'll do some tree testing. So card sorting is where you've got a bunch of headings. Here we go, a bunch of headings. Imagine that blue bar up there is the headings. And I've got a number of topics, and you need to sort them into the right heading. That's closed card sorting. Open card sorting is where I don't give you those headings. You've still got the same set of topics, and I want you to come up what you think would be useful headings for the topics that I've given you. Now, I've only done a subset of this site because this site is humongous and it's got 1,001 things. But, and then what we're going to do after you guys have sorted, I'll have 2 groups sorting closed, 2 groups sorting open, then we can compare and contrast and admire the horror. So, I need 2 groups on this side and 2 groups on this side. Since we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tables, I would say that 3 to 4 rows should form the front group, 3 to 4 rows form the back group, and same on this side. And huddle around because you're going to need to look at some cards. All right, if you're on a write your own headings, now's a good time to start writing. Okay, we've got the close swapping with close, the open swapping with open, see what other people did. Feel free actually at this point to move around the room and see what some of the headings were that the other groups came up with and the different kinds of grouping. And I'll let you wander around for a couple of minutes and then we'll reassemble like Voltron. All right, once you've had a look at what everybody else has done, find a seat. And then we'll have some time for some more audience participation. This is where I feel like we needed some sort of backing track, bit of music, possibly Benny Hill style music. You were all thinking it. All right. So something that you may or may not have noticed was that the people who had a closed sort, so when I gave you already the headings, you finished putting things into bucket much faster than the people who had an open sort. Because thinking about things is hard, and that's why we do this. You will also notice, having swapped tables, that even though, I told you only ever do user testing in groups of 1, and we had groups of 500, this group came up with different sorting to that group came up with different, like everybody's one was different. And this goes to show you just within this room of very smart, intelligent people who maybe don't even know what an Arduino is, we still come up with different categories, and this is what your users are going to do. So I'm going to take, I'm interested in hearing from you. What did you find easy? What did you find hard? If you were running this for yourself with other user testers, what would be tips to your future self if you were going to ever do this again? Because it's awesome.
So the thing I found really interesting was that, from my preference, the open model is more useful than the closed model, because I noticed that the people in the closed model simply sorted things into existing categories. Nobody said, actually, we don't need that category, we don't need this category, we need to write a new category. And so it was all kind of about shuffling deck chairs rather than complete reinvention. So if I wanted to overhaul something and look at the ways in which it would work, I'd be more inclined to go for the open model.
Yep, thank you. So when you, if you're starting at the very beginning of this process, having an open model means that you get much better ideas on what your top-level categories can be. And as you've seen from this interesting website, their top-level category choices are actually very misleading, not very clear, and hard to sort stuff. Normally, if I had a really good taxonomy and I was confident in it and it was using language that maybe already existed in the world, then I would just stick with the closed sort because it's faster and less cognitive load for your users. If you're at the very opening end of your process though, and you want to sit there and maybe overhaul some of your language, then yeah, you absolutely go with an open sort. And then you can also do a mixed one and say, here are some categories you can use, here's some blanks, fill in the blanks, or which ones do you think that we don't need at all, and get rid of them. And that's why if you're doing this sort of thing in person, you can actually explore further with the user based on how they're reacting to what you've presented them. What did anybody else notice? Yes, Katie.
I think useful titles are useful.
You mean naming things is hard? Who would have thought?
Yes.
Yes, the titles were not very clear. And hopefully, this user feedback, if I was actually doing this for element 14 for real, then I would be sitting there and saying, what did you not understand? Why is this not clear? What else would you be suggesting that we title this at? Any more? Yes.
I really want to know more about who the audience was. So, for example, should we split Arduino from Raspberry Pi, for example, or should they be clustered together? And that would kind of come down to whether or not those communities or those user groups are actually quite separate, whereas they could fit either independently or as a big cluster, depending on more information about the user base.
Yes. So understanding who your user is and who you're trying to sell things to is very important, and it will actually affect the hierarchy that you're trying to build. I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors that go into building a good IA, and they're actually the same set of factors that you always consider when writing content. Who are your users? What are they trying to achieve when they are looking at this content, whether it's microcopy or help files on a website or a printed brochure. You're still answering the same questions, and you need to understand it before you go diving into your IA. And that is one of the biggest things that I struggle with element 14 is that some people are just going to use it to go and buy hardware. Other people are really invested into the community aspect and sit there and make friends, and they're talking about their projects and what are they going to do next. And there's webinars and the Ben Heck show, which actually hasn't been produced for 2 years. They've got all this additional content that's being generated by either paid for or by contributors, and that's going in there, and it's sort of all things to all people. And that's why I think that some of this task really struggles, because it doesn't know who its user is. I'd love to talk to you more about this. I've actually got a bunch of tree testing tasks that you can do afterwards, so if you want to come find me in the hallway track, then I'm happy to talk to you some more with the terrible element 14. But we're running out of time. So here's some additional resources. These slides will be available on the internet so that you can click on them. There are online tools that will let you do card sorting and tree jacking so that you can... tree testing, so that you can do them online without having to have bits of card around. There's lots of websites that talk about information architecture. It is not new. It's been around since the 70s. People were thinking about information architecture and how you structure it long before, well, the internet was even a thing. There is the Write the Docs Slack. There's a bunch of books written about it. Donna Spencer's guide I found invaluable, and she actually helps run UX Australia. So if you want to find out more about that, that would be a conference you can go and check out. And our lovely host today, Joe, actually put me on the path of IA a few years ago at another LCA. Anyway, I hope you found today interesting. I hope you'll go away thinking about information architecture and understanding the challenges it is to get it right, and the ways that you could maybe use these tools to improve your existing documentation. You know, whether it's for internal wiki, it's still valuable for doing it, as well as for external customers. Any general questions? Do I have 2 seconds for that? Although you've probably already asked them.
We have a minute or two for maybe 1 or 2 questions, if anyone has anything else they'd like to ask. Yes, we've got one over here.
Thank you very much for that. That was actually really enlightening. One question, I guess, is how far up do you, because creating headings or doing things like that, it's about creating levels of obscurity up from content. And you never know where the next manager is going to take this project, so you never know how to how far up do you create your headings? Do you have any suggestions or ideas, or is it all about what you've only got right now and worry about that later?
Like if you know that something is coming, maybe if you know that there's a new project in the works that's going to add a new product or a new tool into your suite, then you might sit there and do a little bit of planning in advance of that. But mostly I'd be guided by your users. Like if you come up with a good information architecture, so long as your overall content is similarly along the same lines. Like if I sit there and I've got a cake shop and I'm producing cake shop content, and I decide that I'm going to sell cake tins along with my cake shop content, that's okay. If I suddenly start to sell cars, it's not going to fit into that information architecture.
Yeah.
So, if you know you've got a new project coming, or you don't know, but, you've got to do the best you can, and, something that was in the earlier slide is revise. Like, it's okay to go back and say, this is no longer working for us, we need to rerun through those 5 steps, figure out what we've got, where are our gaps, and do it again. And, hopefully as you iterate over it, over a course of years, it'll get faster and easier.
Got it. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, any other questions before we wrap?
Great.
No,
Thank you,
very good.
everybody.
Everyone, please thank Nicola.